He called himself Elias Mercer now, but once upon a different life he had been someone else entirely, a man shaped by repetition and routine, by steel floors and humming machines, and the constant rhythm of factory clocks that ruled his existence for nearly 3 decades. He had been the kind of man who measured time in shift changes and pay periods, who believed stability was the highest form of success, who thought loyalty was a currency that could never lose value. For most of his adult life, his days began before sunrise and ended long after dark, his body moving through familiar motions while his mind clung to one simple creed: work hard, stay faithful, protect your family, and life will reward you. He had believed that so deeply it became part of his identity, woven into his bones, into his posture, into the way he carried himself through the world. He wasn't chasing ambition, fame, or recognition. He wanted predictability, safety, and a future that looked like a straight line instead of a gamble. He wore the same boots, used the same locker, punched the same badge, and took pride in being the man who could always be counted on when machines failed or systems collapsed. He didn't see himself as special, just necessary, and necessity gave him purpose. That sense of purpose followed him home every night, clung to him like the scent of oil and metal, shaped his relationships, his choices, his silence. He thought sacrifice was noble. He thought endurance was love. He thought presence was measured by what you provided, not by how often you were seen. He thought being tired meant you were doing something right. He believed all of this without question, without hesitation, without doubt, because that belief system had built his entire world. It had given him structure, identity, and a sense of moral certainty. What he didn't understand, what he couldn't understand yet, was that the same belief system that built his life would also be the thing that destroyed it. Because devotion without awareness becomes blindness, and loyalty without balance becomes self-erasure, and sacrifice without boundaries becomes permission for others to take more than they deserve. His story didn't begin with betrayal. It began with trust. And trust, when it breaks, doesn't shatter loudly. It fractures slowly, quietly, invisibly, until one day the whole structure collapses without warning. Years earlier, in a season that still lived in his memory like a warm photograph, he met a woman named Clara Whitfield at a small neighborhood gathering that smelled of grilled food and late summer air, where laughter drifted between lawn chairs and music hummed from a cheap speaker on a patio. She had been standing near a cooler, laughing openly, freely, with a kind of ease that made the world feel lighter just by being near her. When their eyes met, there was no awkwardness, no hesitation, just a calm, unspoken recognition that something had shifted. They talked easily, naturally, like two people who didn't need to perform for each other. She was composed but warm, confident without arrogance, intelligent without condescension, and she had a way of simplifying life's chaos into manageable pieces. She worked in a corporate office downtown, lived a structured life, dressed professionally during the week and casually on weekends, and somehow made him feel like the future was something friendly instead of intimidating. Their relationship grew slowly, organically, without drama or spectacle: simple dinners, quiet drives, shared routines, comfortable silence. He proposed without grandeur, without theatrics, just a question spoken honestly in a small apartment one evening, and she answered before he finished asking. Their wedding was modest, their honeymoon brief, their expectations grounded. They didn't dream of luxury, they dreamed of stability, of a home, of permanence, of building something together that would outlast them. They saved relentlessly, denied themselves indulgences, treated money like a tool instead of a pleasure. Every dollar had a purpose. When they finally bought their house, a modest, quiet place with a yard and a garage, it felt like a victory over chaos itself. To him, that house wasn't just a structure. It was proof that effort mattered, that discipline worked, that life could be engineered into something safe. They filled it with conversations about the future, with plans for children, with imagined vacations, with visions of a long, predictable life together. Clara spoke often about wanting to be present for their future children, about being there for every milestone, every moment, every memory. He promised he would carry the financial weight so she could carry the emotional one, And he meant it, completely, without conditions, without resentment, without limits. Their first child, Noah, was born during a winter storm that locked the city in ice and silence. And when Elias held him for the first time, something fundamental inside him shifted. The world rearranged itself around that small body in his arms, and suddenly everything had a new hierarchy. Nothing mattered more than protection, than provision, than safety. He made a silent vow that his child would never feel instability, never fear uncertainty, never question whether someone was there for him. A few years later, their daughter Mara was born, loud, fierce, alive in a way that filled every room she entered. Clara looked at Elias in the hospital room and told him their family was complete, and he believed her without hesitation. Shortly after, she left her job to stay home, explaining that she wanted to be fully present, that she didn't want to miss their children growing up while someone else raised them. He didn't question it. It fit their narrative. It fit their values. It fit his belief system, so he worked more. He took extra shifts, learned new systems, made himself indispensable, not because he wanted power, but because indispensability meant security. It meant income. It meant stability. The years blurred together into a pattern of effort and routine. The children grew. The bills were paid. The cars ran. The house stayed intact. From the outside, it looked like success. From the inside, it felt like responsibility. He carried the weight of everything and called it love. Clara managed the household with efficiency and order. The kids grew into their personalities, Noah quiet and withdrawn, Mara sharp and outspoken. Elias was proud of the life they had built. When the house was finally paid off, when the last payment cleared and the deed was truly theirs, he felt like he had reached the finish line of a long race. Years of sacrifice crystallized into one quiet moment at a kitchen table. He thought sincerely that this was what winning looked like. But stability, when left unquestioned, becomes a blindfold, and blindfolds make it easy to miss small changes. Clara began to change in ways so subtle they felt harmless. She seemed lighter, more energized, more animated. She took more care in her appearance, laughed more at her phone, guarded her screen without realizing it. Elias assumed it was adjustment, growth, independence. He was too tired to analyze it, too focused on survival mode routines to notice patterns. The house felt different in small ways, furniture rearranged, habits shifted, rhythms altered, but nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarm. He explained everything logically. Teenagers drank sometimes. Teenagers were distant, spouses changed, life evolved. He believed in explanations more than instincts. Even when unfamiliar scents lingered in familiar spaces, even when behavior didn't quite align with words, he chose comfort over confrontation. Exhaustion dulls suspicion. Routine numbs awareness. He was operating on autopilot, measuring life in paychecks and shifts instead of presence and connection. His children grew quieter around him, more guarded, less open. Conversations became short, transactional. Clara became distant in subtle emotional ways, present physically, absent mentally. But Elias interpreted it as stress, as normal family evolution, as the natural distance that forms in long relationships. He didn't want to believe in fractures. He believed in endurance. He believed problems could be outworked. He believed fatigue was temporary. He believed effort could fix anything. What he didn't understand was that effort, when misdirected, can actually accelerate collapse. The first real crack came not with proof, but with a feeling, an instinctual tension that settled in his body without explanation. A sense that something didn't align, that patterns were off, that coincidences were stacking. A vehicle he didn't recognize appeared repeatedly near his street. Clara's explanations were always plausible, always calm, always confident. The house felt occupied even when it was quiet. The air felt different, charged, heavy. He told himself he was imagining things. That exhaustion was creating paranoia. That stress was distorting perception. He had invested too much in this life to question it. Doubt threatened everything he believed about himself, his sacrifices, his choices. So he suppressed it, buried it, rationalized it. He chose comfort over clarity, and clarity waits patiently. It doesn't disappear, it just delays its arrival. When it finally comes, it comes all at once. The day everything collapsed did not arrive with drama or warning. It arrived quietly, unexpectedly, wrapped in free time. A shift ended early. A drive home began with a strange sense of alertness. His street looked the same, but his body knew something before his mind did. A truck he didn't recognize sat in his driveway like it belonged there. His instincts finally overpowered his denial. The house was silent in a way that felt wrong, not empty but occupied. Sounds upstairs. Movement. Then a man, a stranger, panic, flight. Chaos compressed into seconds, and then Clara, breathless, disheveled, exposed. The truth didn't come in words, it came in evidence. In the room, in the bed, in the smell. In the che presence of another life inside his own. 6 months of lies, 6 months of betrayal, 6 months of performance. And worse than the affair itself was the revelation that his children knew, that they had known, that they had chosen silence, that they had protected her. That loyalty in their minds did not belong to him, that his sacrifices had purchased nothing but invisibility. His identity shattered in layers, not just as a husband, but as a father, a provider, a protector, a man. Everything he believed about family collapsed in a single afternoon. What followed was not rage, it was clarity, cold, surgical clarity. He saw the structure of his life for what it was, a system he built that others learned to exploit. He understood suddenly that love without boundaries becomes vulnerability, that sacrifice without awareness becomes permission, that devotion without reciprocity becomes erasure. He did not scream, he did not beg, he did not plead, he detached, he observed, he recalculated. While they assumed he was broken, confused, lost, he was reorganizing his reality. He moved quietly, strategically, methodically. He didn't confront, he planned. He didn't argue, he executed. He dismantled his old life piece by piece, legally where possible, invisibly where necessary. Money moved, assets shifted, accounts emptied, systems changed, identity altered. He didn't act emotionally, he acted structurally. He transformed his existence without spectacle. To them, he disappeared slowly. To himself, he was being reborn deliberately. He didn't seek revenge. He sought separation. He sought autonomy. He sought sovereignty. He wasn't trying to hurt them. He was trying to free himself. There is a difference. One is reactive. The other is intentional. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already finished. The house was gone. The accounts were empty. The stability they had relied on had evaporated. The systems he had built and maintained were no longer sustaining them. Consequences replaced comfort. Reality replaced illusion. Elias didn't watch the fallout. He didn't track the damage. He didn't monitor the collapse. He left geography, identity, and history behind. He became someone else, not illegally, not falsely, but intentionally. A quieter man, a smaller footprint, a simpler life. He traded permanence for freedom, routine for autonomy, visibility for peace. He moved to a place where no one knew his past, where no one asked questions, where existence was simple and self-contained. He reduced his needs, reduced his wants, reduced his exposure. He lived without systems that could trap him again, without dependencies, without expectations. His life became light, mobile, adaptable. He worked for himself, lived for himself, answered only to himself. He no longer carried the emotional weight of others' choices. He no longer mistook endurance for love. He no longer believed sacrifice guaranteed loyalty. He learned that freedom is not comfort, it is control over your own existence. Now he lives quietly in a place where mountains replace machines and silence replaces noise. His days are simple. His nights are calm. His mind is clear. He does not chase happiness, he maintains peace. He does not seek connection, he values autonomy. He does not miss his old life, he understands it. It taught him what not to build again. He doesn't hate the people he left behind. He simply released them. They are part of a life that no longer exists. He doesn't define himself by loss. He defines himself by survival, by adaptation, by transformation. The man he used to be believed that being needed meant being loved. The man he is now knows that being free means being whole. He doesn't regret leaving. He regrets believing that staying was virtue. He regrets confusing loyalty with obligation. He regrets thinking that suffering was proof of character. Those illusions died with his old name. What remains is a man who belongs only to himself. The new life he built did not feel like an escape. It felt like a return to something more honest, more grounded, more human. He lived under the name Rowan Hale now, a name that carried no history, no weight, no inherited expectations. It belonged only to the present moment. In this quiet mountain town, no one cared where he came from, only that he showed up when he said he would, that his word meant something, that his hands were steady and his work was clean. People judged him by what he did, not by who he had been. That was the kind of world he had forgotten existed. A place where identity was built through action instead of reputation, where trust was earned daily instead of assumed. He found a rhythm that had nothing to do with clocks or punch cards or fluorescent lights. Sunrise replaced alarms. Seasons replaced schedules. Weather replaced management. His days were shaped by daylight, by soil, by timber, by water, by wind. He repaired fences, fixed roofs, split firewood, helped farmers during harvest, cleared trails, rebuilt old barns that had been leaning for decades. The work was physical, honest, and slow. It left him tired in a different way, not the hollow exhaustion of endless obligation, but the deep fatigue that comes from real effort and real presence. His body changed. His breathing changed. His posture changed. Even his thoughts changed. He no longer rushed through life like it was a checklist. He lived inside it, fully, deliberately, without urgency, without fear, without the constant pressure of responsibility that used to sit on his chest like a weight. For the first time in decades, his nervous system relaxed. His mind wasn't scanning for emergencies. His body wasn't bracing for demands. His soul wasn't preparing for the next crisis. He existed without anticipation of loss, without expectation of betrayal, without constant vigilance. Peace became his default state, not something he had to earn, not something he had to protect, not something he had to fight for. It simply was. In this place, relationships formed differently. There were no dramatic bonds, no intense attachments, no emotional dependencies, just quiet familiarity, mutual respect, simple presence. Conversations were short but sincere. People didn't overshare. They didn't interrogate. They didn't probe. They existed beside each other, not inside each other's lives, and that suited him. He had lived inside other people's needs for too long. He had built his identity around being useful, being necessary, being relied upon. Now he learned how to be sufficient without being consumed. He learned how to be kind without being exploited. He learned how to help without disappearing. He learned how to exist without negotiating his worth. The library worker knew him as a quiet man who loved history books. The shop owner knew him as someone who always paid cash and never argued prices. The farmers knew him as someone who showed up early and left without drama. The old fisherman knew him as someone who didn't talk much but listened well. No one needed more than that. No one demanded more than that. No one tried to extract more than that. His life was no longer built around being needed. It was built around being whole. He didn't chase relationships because he no longer feared loneliness. He didn't chase validation because he no longer doubted his value. He didn't chase stability because mountains were quiet and the wind moved through the trees like breath through lungs. Memories would surface, not as pain, not as longing, not as regret, but as data, as information, as lessons. He would think about the man he used to be, the man who believed love was proven through endurance, who believed loyalty was proven through suffering, who believed commitment meant self-erasure. He saw that man now with clarity and compassion, not shame. That man had not been weak. He had been programmed, conditioned, shaped by narratives that glorified sacrifice and punished self-preservation. He had been taught that a good man endures, that a good man provides, that a good man stays, that leaving is failure, that choosing yourself is selfish, that suffering is virtue. He had believed those things without questioning them because everyone around him believed them too. Society rewards endurance. It praises loyalty. It romanticizes sacrifice, but it rarely talks about balance. Rarely talks about boundaries. Rarely talks about self-respect. Rarely talks about reciprocity. He understood now that devotion without mutuality is not love, it is labor. That loyalty without accountability is not virtue, it is vulnerability. That sacrifice without consent is not noble, it is exploitation. These realizations did not make him bitter. They made him clear. Clarity is not anger. Clarity is understanding without illusion, and clarity changes everything. He never contacted his former family. Not out of spite, not out of hatred, not out of revenge, but out of completion. Closure did not require conversation. Healing did not require validation. Growth did not require forgiveness rituals. Some stories end without reconciliation. Some chapters close without dialogue. Some live separate without ceremony. He accepted that. He did not need them to understand his perspective. He did not need them to regret their choices. He did not need apologies to move forward. He did not need accountability to find peace. He had already rebuilt his life, already reclaimed his identity, already redefined his future. Their understanding was irrelevant to his freedom. Their regret would not improve his present. Their suffering would not heal his past. He chose silence not as punishment but as boundary. Silence is not absence. It is distance with intention. It is separation without hostility. It is release without attachment. He did not carry them with him. He did not store them in his mind. He did not preserve them in his identity. They belonged to a version of him that no longer existed, and that version of him was gone, permanently, irreversibly. He had not just changed his name, he had changed his internal architecture, his values, his priorities, his definitions of love, loyalty, and meaning. He had reprogrammed his entire understanding of life. That kind of transformation is not reversible. It is not temporary. It is not situational. It is foundational. He also learned something else in his solitude, that anger is loud but peace is quiet, that revenge is dramatic but freedom is subtle, that destruction is visible but detachment is invisible. The world celebrates chaos, it notices explosions, it records breakdowns, it documents collapse, but it rarely sees quiet exits. It doesn't notice silent withdrawals. It doesn't track internal revolutions. It doesn't record personal awakenings. His transformation was not cinematic. It was not public, it was not performative. It was internal, private, gradual, and complete. No one applauded it, no one witnessed it, no one validated it, and that made it purer because it wasn't done for attention. It wasn't done for approval, it wasn't done to prove anything. It was done for survival, for sanity, for self-respect, for autonomy. He didn't leave to punish others. He left to save himself. That distinction mattered. It still does. He didn't build his new life as a reaction. He built it as a correction to decades of misaligned beliefs, a correction to inherited narratives, a correction to cultural programming, a correction to self-neglect disguised as virtue. That is why it lasted. That is why it felt stable. That is why it felt real. As seasons passed, he became less aware of his past and more rooted in his present. Memories lost emotional charge. Names lost meaning. Faces lost definition. Events lost intensity. Time softened everything. Distance neutralized everything. Healing did not come as a sudden release, it came as gradual indifference. The day he realized he hadn't thought about them in weeks, he understood he was truly free. Not because he didn't care, but because he no longer carried. Carrying is the burden. Caring is just memory. He still cared in a human sense, about people, about life, about suffering, about pain, but not in a personal sense tied to them. They were no longer his story. He stopped narrating his life in relation to theirs. His identity no longer referenced them. His existence no longer revolved around their choices. He no longer defined himself as a husband, a father, a provider, a protector. He defined himself as a man, just a man, a human being. Singular consciousness, responsible only for his own actions, his own values, his own integrity, his own direction. That simplicity was liberating. He no longer carried labels that dictated behavior. He no longer performed roles that erased him. He no longer lived inside scripts that demanded self-sacrifice. He lived authentically, quietly, deliberately. He chose what he wanted. He rejected what he didn't. He owed explanations to no one. He justified himself to no one. His life became his own, in a way it had never been before. Sometimes, sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee as the sun dipped behind the mountains, he would reflect on the strange nature of transformation. How destruction and creation often happen at the same time. How endings and beginnings are not opposites but partners. How loss can create space. how collapse can create clarity, how betrayal can create truth, how suffering can create self-awareness. His old life had not been meaningless, it had been instructive. It taught him discipline, responsibility, commitment, work ethic, endurance, patience. But it also taught him what happens when those traits are unbalanced, when they are not protected by boundaries, when they are not grounded in self-worth, when they are not paired with self-respect. He didn't regret his past, he integrated it. He didn't resent his sacrifices, he recontextualized them. He didn't hate his former self, he forgave him, because that man did the best he could with the beliefs he had. Growth is not condemning who you were, it is understanding why you were that way and choosing differently. He chose differently now, in every way that mattered. The quiet truth of his life is this: he did not become happier in the way people imagine happiness. There was no constant joy, no perpetual euphoria, no endless optimism. He became stable, calm, grounded, centered. His nervous system rested, his mind slowed, his emotions regulated. His life felt balanced, sustainable, peaceful. Happiness is a spike, peace is a baseline. He chose the baseline. He chose sustainability over intensity. He chose consistency over chaos. He chose simplicity over complexity. He chose freedom over familiarity. And he chose himself, not in a selfish way, not in a narcissistic way, not in a destructive way, but in a sovereign way, in a self-respecting way, in a conscious way, in a deliberate way. He did not isolate himself from the world, he just stopped letting the world define him. He did not reject relationships, he just refused dependency. He did not avoid responsibility, he just refused exploitation. He did not abandon love, he just redefined it. Love to him now meant mutuality, reciprocity, respect, choice, not obligation, not fear, not endurance, not silence. There is no dramatic ending to his story, no final confrontation, no reconciliation scene, no emotional resolution arc, no poetic justice, no cinematic closure. There is only continuity. A man living a quiet life in a small place, doing honest work, breathing clean air, watching seasons change, carrying no unnecessary weight. There is only presence. There is only peace. There is only forward motion. His story does not conclude, it stabilizes. It doesn't climax, it settles. It doesn't explode, it dissolves into normalcy. And that for him is victory, not dominance, not revenge, not triumph over others, but autonomy, ownership, sovereignty, self-direction. He controls his time, his energy, his space, his future, his identity, his story, and no one else does. That is the freedom he found, not the absence of pain, but the absence of captivity. He doesn't tell people his past. He doesn't romanticize it. He doesn't dramatize it. He doesn't weaponize it. It exists as a chapter, not a personality, as history, not identity, as memory, not motivation. When people ask vague questions, he gives vague answers. When they probe, he smiles and redirects. He has learned that privacy is power, that silence is sovereignty, that mystery is protection. His life is no longer an open system, it is a closed circuit. Energy goes out selectively. Nothing enters without intention. He built his world small on purpose. Small systems are harder to corrupt. Simple structures are harder to exploit. Minimalism is not aesthetic, it is defense. He owns less, needs less, wants less, expects less. And because of that, he fears less. He is harder to manipulate, harder to pressure, harder to control, harder to trap. His freedom is not fragile, it is resilient, built on independence, not attachment. On self-sufficiency, not dependency. On awareness, not assumption. In another life, he was a man who believed the world rewarded loyalty. In this life, he understands that the world responds to boundaries. He does not live in cynicism. He lives in realism. He does not distrust everyone, he trusts selectively. He does not withdraw from connection, he chooses it carefully. He does not reject commitment, he defines it differently. Commitment to self, to integrity, to balance, to awareness, to autonomy, to peace. His story is not about escape, it is about evolution. Not about loss, it is about transformation. Not about betrayal, it is about awakening. Not about revenge, it is about reclamation. He reclaimed his time, his energy, his identity, his direction, his life. And that reclamation is permanent. Because once a man learns how to belong to himself, he never gives that ownership away again.